Emma Taylor. I'm the founder of Nimbus 90. We're thrilled that you're with us today. We are in episode 5 of our third series of Chief Disruptor Breakfast Club. Today, we're looking at Beyond Diversity. This is very much the place where we explore the newest ideas in business and in technology, and we have a real chance to pose questions to disruptors themselves. This series is called The 8 Business Imperatives, and in each episode, we are looking at the 8 business imperatives and why we examine that we are actually not there yet. We launched Breakfast Club at the beginning of lockdown to create a forum for people to listen to experts and to disruptors to share their stories, and also for our members and our partners to ask those guest disruptors the biggest questions on key topics. So please do submit any questions you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. And we'll come to those at the end. But as I say, if you would like to pose any questions, please do put those into the Q&A box and we'll come to them as soon as we possibly can. This morning, we're looking at Beyond Diversity, and we're delighted to have Brandie and Lola here joining us. Brandie has an absolute wealth of experience. She's led many organizations, and most currently she is with Marco Pierre White Restaurants, where she manages about 50 of the business. She's strongly informed in a wide array of hospitality disciplines, and she has a huge amount of expertise. Her varied career in hotels, high street restaurants, airlines, and so on has meant that she's got a huge wealth of leadership that she's very kindly going to share just some of it with us today, what she's learned, what she's been through, her skills, and so on. She's specifically interested in the way in which social shifts and also innovations influence business and strategy, and that is done subtly. Brandie's also recently been listed as number 41 of the top 50 listing leaders, alongside the amazing leaders such as New Zealand's phenomenal female MP and also Sheryl Sandberg. I'd also like to welcome Lola. Lola's an undergraduate studying geography and also looking at the inequalities in the world every day. Because of this, she's actually founded the Glass Ceiling magazine, which is going to launch very soon. And it focuses on a community and an intersectional feminist project, which gives voice to unique and diverse experiences. So it's great to have you both with us today. Thank you, Brandie and Lola, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So as we talked about, we are going to talk about Beyond Diversity, and I encourage you to put any questions you have in the Q&A box, which we'll come on to later. This is a topic that we wanted to cover because getting genuine diversity across an organization is still not something you really see much of. So between us, we're going to give some of our views today. I'm going to start almost with that big fundamental question to both of you. What actually diversity means to you, Brandie, and also to Lola. So can I start with you, Brandie?
Thank you, Emma. What a great question to start on. Well, differences are challenging, I know, and that's why diversity is so exciting. Because to me, diversity is about being open to every possibility and having an inclusive culture. Because they do say great minds really do think differently.
Yeah, and for me, I would say diversity is not just listening to groups, but it's listening to individual voices and not just the wider narratives that surround diversity. Everyone has their own set of unique experiences, and it's important to see diversity as dynamic. It's not something that you can just tick a box in a year ago and think, oh, we've achieved it. It's something that's an ongoing process, and you need to constantly reevaluate it.
Thank you both. I think that's absolutely key, and I think it shouldn't be that sort of tokenism and tick boxing, should it? So where has your passion come from to really focus on diversity? Where's that come from, Lola?
For me, coming into feminism and looking at intersectional feminism, and if I struggle in spaces, then how's a Black woman going to feel? How's a trans person going to feel? And so also as a geography student, I see that the 21st century is the most affluent century for humans. So why is it that not everyone has the same opportunities? And then again, like Brandie said before, it's so exciting to start having these conversations and looking at diversity because it's an untapped resource that has so much potential.
And Brandie, your thoughts as well. Where does that passion come from for you?
So my passion for diversity stems back a long way, probably trackable to my teenage years, really, but with focused, single-minded, acute insight and excitement around gender equality and gender parity. And certainly a lot of the work that I've done with schools, colleges, universities, and in my own writing has been steered towards this direction. But to bring the conversation back to the wider one of diversity, my passion has been ignited because of one very simple philosophy that I hold, which is I often imagine a business world and a general world where diversity of thoughts, ideas, and backgrounds reign. And I often think, what an impossible possibility that scenario could really create, because I also imagine implementing, inspiring, impacting, and inventing different things in organizations in a million different ways. And then I often think, wow, for me, that's just the best of the best methodology. And I think that's what arouses my passions in diversity.
And I couldn't agree more. I think, we limit ourselves by not actually including one and all, and also looking at all the capabilities and the skills. It shouldn't be on what's on the outside of us all. It should be, what are our capabilities within? How can we bring those together? How can we nurture those? How can we expose those in a positive sense? So I couldn't agree more with both of you. In terms of the different experiences so far for you, what is your view of diversity in business, particularly Brandie? What have you seen so far?
So my view on diversity in business, diversity to me is an action. For an action to happen, it requires us to do something to reach a common aim. So my view on diversity in business is coming from this angle, this perspective. So I've got a couple of views, and the first one is around intentionality. I think business needs to be a bit more intentional about diversity. I think business needs to actively seek different mindsets. This doesn't always happen. Sometimes actually when people have different mindsets, we think they're awkward, they're causing trouble. So business needs to actually go out there and actively seek that different mindset. I think business needs to bring diversity into meetings and around the table, so that everything that we do in business is quite diverse. I also think that business needs to create opportunities and bring opportunities into workplaces, because after all, business reflects the communities that we work in. And am I right? Business is moving here. Things are changing. The needle is being moved by business, but it's just so slow. And I fear that until we make diversity intentional, we'll be having this conversation in 2030, because after all, these very same conversations were had in the 1990s, and here we are in 2020, still talking about diversity because some of us just can't see it happening in all businesses. So that's my first view on that, about intentionality. I think my second one is around business being a bit honest about the status quo. Because when we're honest about where we are from a diversity perspective, we're then able to build some strategic blocks behind it that steers us towards where we need to be. But I think until we're honest with ourselves in terms of where we are as a business, it's then very difficult to move forward. Because the most important aspect of diversity in business is cognitive diversity, which is around diversity of thought, diversity of ideas, diversity of action, all of which is amazing for business solutions. And business can't tap into these solutions unless we actually get our act together, understand where we are, put a plan in place, move this forward, and then tap into these amazing business solutions.
I couldn't agree more. I think I find it quite interesting in some senses. We're in an organization where unintentionally we have many females. And actually it's purely because the skills that they have. It wasn't because we tried to recruit male or female or for any other equality or what might appear to be inequality reason. Our aim has always been, what are the skills? What are the capabilities? Are you a natural fit? Can you collaborate well? Can you achieve the outcomes? And can you bring more to the business? And can you learn more and strive? And we're always looking for that excellence. So I couldn't agree more. It's really looking at, what are the capabilities? And in some ways, why that hasn't always been the case through time is confusing to a certain extent. Sort of coming over to you, Lola, as well. Can you give us some examples of stories where this is actually changing in business?
Yeah, so just before I talk about that, I just want to mention something about what Brandie said, because I think it's so true about the potential that we were talking about. And in 2025, there's 75% of the workforce are going to be millennials. So we do need to put in those actionable goals, because people like me, people from like a younger generation, we're kind of uninterested in organizations that aren't diverse. So I think now is the time to be thinking about that. So about the stories, one of the stories that I've been following and that I'm really excited about is Munroe Bergdorf's. She's a Black trans queer activist. And in 2017, she was recruited as a model by L'Oreal, but a couple of weeks after she was recruited, she was fired instantly because she spoke out about racism in the workplace. And since then, she's become more and more active in the community, or the trans community, the Black community. And because of the momentum of Black Lives Matter that we've seen quite recently in the last couple of months, L'Oreal released a statement saying that they were committed to diversity, they were committed to supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. But actually, when it comes down to it, they cast aside Munroe for saying those same things in 2017. So she criticised them about that. And since then, they've had discussions to do with diversity and inclusion, and they've invited her onto the board for diversity and inclusion for L'Oreal. So I think the key message for that story is that L'Oreal are looking back and thinking, how can we hold ourselves accountable for what we've done in the past? Because those are the exact voices that we need to listen to, are the voices that have been cast aside before. So take those voices in to your company and see what they have to say and see the potential that that is going to give your company. So I'm excited to see more stories like that.
I agree. And I think there have been many, haven't they, over the last couple of months, where some of these companies are coming out and saying, we very much endorse this, we believe, and so on. And yet their employees are coming out in the press, on LinkedIn, wherever it might be, and actually saying, this is not what's going on inside our organization. And it's so important that there isn't that sort of, I could just stick a quick label on this, almost grab the headline, grab the hashtag, follow that, and actually they're not really endorsing, their belief isn't there. And I think we're in a very different age, which can hopefully, Brandie, create this change where actually people are going to speak out. Those employees are brave and they will speak out in a way that maybe before they didn't have the platform. They might tell their friends, they might tell their family, they might tell someone else, they might be heard in a pub or whatever it might be. But actually the voice, the noise has become much, much louder. And I think that can only be a good thing if it's done in a safe way. When I mean a safe way, so that lives are not put at risk. So I couldn't agree more. We're in a different movement, and I think that can only be a good thing if there is actually the change that follows and the action actually takes place. So just sort of to come on to some other areas, I think there are some pretty terrifying statistics, and I just want to sort of hone in on some of those. So companies that instill diversity in their culture are shown to actually do better than companies that don't. And I think many of us listening today know that. We've got many examples across different industries that have really endorsed it, really believe in it, and really driving it as a strategic change or indeed direction. And actually a Boston Consulting Group study showed that below average diversity in leadership teams yields a 26% average innovation revenue, while above average diversity leadership saw a 45 average innovation revenue. So we're looking there at a 19% increase where actually diversity sits at the center of those leadership teams. Brandie, can I come to you in terms of the sort of the business case for diversity? Why should businesses be listening to it?
That's a great question. Oh God, there's a million cases I could build, but I just want to pick up on a couple of important things that has been said this morning. So let me build a case around millennials, and Lola mentioned it, so to bring Lola's point back into the conversation. Business case one, millennials seek diverse workplaces. For them, it matters. But why should it matter to us if millennials want diverse workplaces? Well, here's why. Currently, we have an intergenerational workforce in the UK, and it's a nice even split. But to Lola's point, research tells us that by 2025, which isn't actually far from today, the pendulum is going to tilt, and we're going to have 75% of our workforce who are going to be millennials. So here's the business case then. If over half of our workforce wants diverse workplaces, we probably need to start listening to them, because otherwise we're going to have half of our workforce who are disengaged. And a disengaged team means that we can't get the productivity that we need. Productivity will then mean that our businesses can't flourish. So business case one, millennials seek diverse workplaces, let's give it them. To build on the second one that Emma, you eloquently put from the BCG research that's just been done, diverse workplaces yield higher performance, financial performance. The research is just widely out there that anyone can reach. The evidence is growing. And again, like I said, it's a very heavily researched area. Businesses with the best, who have the best places for diversity, have great revenue growth. Our own FTSE organizations tell us that, because simply put, if you strip it all out and you get rid of all the numbers, and you just want to look at it from a very simplistic point of view, decisions are well balanced when they're made by people who are diverse in their thinking, where there's mixed gender, where there's diverse ethnicities, where there's diverse social, sexual, religious orientations, where physical abilities are different, where educational backgrounds are different. They're all a representation of the communities that we live in. So when decisions are made there, they're generally made for the good of the community. Hence, organizations doing really well when they have diverse workforce. So my second business case is that diversity is actually good business, and it yields for performance, great financial performance. My final one, which is quite an important one to me actually, is about employer branding. We can all name very quickly organizations that we know or perceive to be very diverse. A good history of genuine diversity enhances a company's reputation. It's a no-brainer. Businesses who are seen as improving, promoting, and doing a little bit more for diversity are seen as socially sustainable businesses and social organizations, and they're seen as human organizations. And we all want to work for organizations that are human. And incidentally, Emma, these organizations actually, because of their inclusivity, see lower reduced turnovers, which means they've got organizations who have teams of stay. So it's a win-win scenario, really. So my three cases have been built on what Lola first mentioned around the millennials wanting diverse workplaces, and then moving on to your point around financial performance from the BCG report, and then of course around employer branding. So here's the reason why business must listen to diversity.
Absolutely. And I think also we put a dreadful pandemic into the mix, and I think we look at that as well. There are increasing number of customers, consumers who just won't talk, work with, buy from, whatever it is, those brands if they feel that their ethics, their equality practices and everything else that they in theory put at the heart of their organizations aren't actually akin or aligned to what they also believe in. We're seeing a real shift, aren't we? The pandemic has brought many difficult things in front of us, but actually at the same time, it's really brought some of the, those amazing organizations to the fore that maybe we didn't know about, or we've been really surprised about how they've acted in this particular world. So there is some good in some ways that has come out of this pandemic as well. If we look, Brandie, at the last 20 years, a huge period of time in business and your business experience, have you seen some of this pan out?
In the 19 years that I've been working, I am showing my age now actually, Emma, businesses have been have gone much more diverse. When I first started my career, certainly in hospitality, it wasn't diverse at all. Boardrooms were not diverse, middle management was not diverse, junior teams were not diverse. In fact, certainly in my industry, I can remember one CEO who was female, Karen Forrester, and I mention Karen's name everywhere I go because when I was growing up in my industry, she was such an inspiration. She was the only female CEO that I ever knew. And it took me a very long time to see another person that looked or sounded like Karen Forrester. She used to lead TGI Fridays. She was the CEO of TGI Fridays in those days. Times have moved on and this has improved a lot. And now we have wonderful, amazing women leading organizations everywhere. But let's not kid ourselves because here and now still, in the FTSE 100 organizations, only 5% of the CEOs in FTSE are female. 5%. And it has changed, of course it has. From 2013 till now, it has moved by one woman. You bring it down a bit to the FTSE 250 CEOs and only 2% are women. So times have changed, but going back to intentionality, it's just so slow and the pace is not quickening up. And that's why we need to start really having serious conversations about diversity.
Absolutely. And I think sort of moving on a little bit, we ran a breakfast club in an earlier series and we heard from Tessa Clark. So she's one of the co-founders of Olio, and it's a neighborhood food sharing app designed to reduce food waste. And she shared that only 1% of venture capitalist investment goes to female founded businesses. And that 1% is obviously horrendous when we look at the ratio of men to women in this world, or indeed across sexes. In addition to that, 89% of mixed businesses and the remainder go to mixed teams. This demonstrates that we still have a pretty long way to go in that respect. What are the gaps we're missing in discussions about diversity, do you feel?
I think if we actually look at the gaps quite literally, what are the cognitive gaps that we're not seeing or hearing about? So I have a frame of reference where I see my own perspective, and I'm not aware of my own frames of reference unless I talk to and listen to diverse voices. So the more that you include diverse voices, firstly, the more that you're aware of your own perspectives, but you're also expanding your knowledge of the problem space. If you keep listening to voices that are like you, you're going to be kind of put in a corner of the problem space where you're just keep on looking at the same problem from the same angle. So you can actually think about this in terms of ideas. So if you had 10 people working on a project and you ask them all to come up with 10 ideas, if they're not very diverse, they might come up with 10 ideas altogether. If they're very diverse, they're going to come up with around 100 ideas. That's not just 50% more ideas or 100% more ideas, that's 1,000 times % more ideas. So you're completely covering the problem space that you have. And it's very exciting to see that. So it's all about the collective brain. How do you build that collective brain? And I read a book recently called Rebel Ideas by Matthew Said. And one of the quotes in it was really, really good. And it says, you can be individually perceptive, but collectively blind. So I think that is exactly what we're kind of talking about when we look at gaps. What are those blind spots and how do we cover them?
I think that's absolutely right, Lola. Other things that we've been hearing from members include an example where quite a senior member of ours said that she was talking to a 19-year-old intern that she had, and that intern actually developed a new diversity and inclusion policy as her intern project. And she actually ended up then presenting it to the CEO of a multinational automotive company. And as a result of him being extremely impressed, they've actually integrated her ideas into their diversity and inclusion policy. And I think, as you're saying there, Lola, it is about that collective thought. It is about making sure the right people are at the table, if you like, and bringing that policy together. Just to get a sense there, Brandie, how can businesses effectively create diversity policies that aren't just about filling quotas? Is the issue that we simply don't have the right people working on these if they're being created essentially by not very diverse executive teams? what do we need to look at here? What is the issue?
Well, before I answer that question, let me just say well done to the 19-year-old lady. That generation just don't stop to amaze me. Well done to her. Kudos to what she did. That's just fantastic news. And yes, Emma, we all know that we don't have diverse exec teams around, and so policies are sort of very one way. But I think it goes beyond policies. It's not the policies that are a problem, it's the application of the policies, because you can have a very good policy that's applied rather badly, and it gives you the same effect. So it's more the policy application. So what I would say is that business leaders need to probably look into policy application and occasionally maybe ratify those to understand what the direction that's moving. But to bring it back to the question that you said beyond quotas and what business can do. Well, here's a thought. I have a low-hanging fruit thought for every business. I think one of the things that we can do very easily in organizations is in hiring and promotion. When it comes to promotion, I think promotions ought to be fair, with diversity in mind. When it comes to hiring, I think we're pushing against an open door. I think hiring panels have got to be a bit more diverse, so that they can actually identify the diversity that the organization requires in the recruitment process. I think the candidate journey from attraction right through to onboarding has got to be diverse as well. And I think it starts all the way back to stock images on the website. Does everybody that click on a company website see themselves in the company? The marketing material, the recruitment tools that the organization use, are they diverse enough? So we've got to go way back to there and then ensure that when an employee joins, the entire onboarding is also quite diverse, so we don't lose them in the 90-day retention period. So that's key. I think we need to ensure that our interviewees are actually trained in inclusive interviewing skills, so they're aware of what they're doing, what they're saying, how they're behaving. Because for me, the ethos of hiring a diverse workforce is simple, and it's this: it is not the responsibility of the underrepresented candidate to navigate around the tall walls that organization has through diversity. It is the responsibility of the organization that is trying to make an effort to reduce diversity, to break down the walls so that the intended candidate can navigate very easily and very genuinely. And I think if we keep this ethos, then we'll move a bit forward with the diversity conversation. So that's the first one around hiring and promotion. I think the second piece that I can share is about making someone responsible for diversity. Diversity, as we found out the past 20-30 minutes, is such a broad area. And for us, for any organization to be able to digest where they are and pinpoint the areas of diversity that they're actually not making inroads in, somebody's got to be made responsible for diversity to be able to actually manage that expectation that the organization expects. And then finally, I think business leaders ought to educate themselves around diversity. The teams in organizations need to educate themselves around diversity as well, because we all need to keep an eye on global events and traditions and approaches to work and understand how they differ across the world. I think business leaders need to take time to actually get a broader sense of cultural appreciation and sensitivity to the equality challenges that are glaring in all our faces, for which we're talking about today. And I think everybody in an organization needs to take time to get to know their colleagues from different backgrounds. Because I think if we make sure that we've all educated ourselves, if we make somebody responsible for diversity in an organization, if we hire right, with diversity in mind, and promote rights with diversity in mind, we will move forward with this potential challenge that we've got.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there have been some interesting stories recently of how people are hiring, you know, where they've changed the words on their adverts. For example, it's changed from really interesting men to women, or whoever, whichever group it is, you know, they've really got to think about everything from the website through to the marketing, through to the wording, everything. And Lola, what are your thoughts as someone, you know, about to come into the working world. What are your views?
Yeah, I think to come on to Brandie's point about having diverse voices on the board, that's so true because it removes the friction in hiring as well. If you look at all the brain scan reports about diversity, is when someone repeats your thoughts or mirrors your thoughts back to you, it releases pleasure centers in your brain. So if you are not very diverse in your board, then you're always going to be hiring the same sort of people. So putting people that are diverse on your board is going to just open up the recruitment pool and broaden the amount of talent that you're going to be recruiting. So that's a really good point. And then I guess about intergenerational diversity as well, I want to come on to talking about how you can utilize younger voices in business, because I think that is one of the most important things that a lot of businesses miss, because of the way that we go through kind of our career paths, is that it sometimes seems to be that younger voices are lost in the process that we go through. Everyone gets to a higher stage when they're older, so you miss out on those voices. So how do you utilize younger voices? And one of the best examples that I can think of are shadow boards, which are essentially boards of young people who advise executive teams on key decisions and strategies. And it essentially lifts the conceptual blinkers that are attaching to age. And it actually does work. If you look at between 2014 and 2017, Prada and Gucci. Prada did not have a shadow board, and Gucci did. And Prada sales dropped by over 10%. Gucci sales increased by over 100%. And that's because Gucci realized that the impact of social media and online marketing really fast, because young people are quick on those trends, and Prada did not realize that. So that's what young people can bring to the table.
And I think you bring so much more than that. I think we forget that actually when we were 14, 16, 18, whatever age it was, we had ideas, we had strong opinions, we had beliefs, we had things that can change the world. I mean, we all know who Greta is, for example. You know, many people are out there with huge capabilities. And I think we sometimes forget that actually we've all come from somewhere. We didn't start our careers or our beliefs or our attitudes or aspirations when we were 21. We started at a much younger age, whether it's nurture or nature. We've spoken a lot, and I'm really looking forward to Lola, you launching your magazine. I'd love us to share that with the members when you do. I think, Brandie, your expertise has been invaluable. I'd like to just come on to some questions that we're getting from listeners. One is from Steve, and it says, how do businesses publicize good progress in diversity with sensitivity and without looking opportunistic? Can I hand that over, first of all, to Lola, as someone who's going to be going into the working world soon? So how do businesses publicize good progress in diversity with sensitivity without looking opportunist? I'll come to you, and then Brandie, please, to you as well.
I think, as I mentioned before with Munro's story, it's about being accountable and realizing your mistakes. Being sensitive is seeing what you've done in the past and apologizing for that as well. And so that's one of the main points, but also have those diverse voices at the top of your organization as well, because that brings a level of humanity to what you're saying about diversity. So I think they're the 2 points that I would suggest for that.
Thank you. And Brandie?
And I would say by default that is diversity, and what an awesome question that is. The answer I would give to that is actually just put it out as you would, because the beauty of great businesses, great diverse businesses, is actually being able to navigate through diversity without having to worry about who's thinking what the other organization is thinking, or what the employees are thinking about diversity. And it goes back about the honesty around the status quo. So I wouldn't overthink it. I would just say it as it is. But that's such an awesome question, and that explains where we are going and where we could go with diversity. It's about being honest about where we are, and then just putting it out there as it is without worrying about anything else, because all of this is just noise. Do what you need to do for your organization without worrying about anything else.
Thank you very much. And Stephen also had a question. So Brandie is an underrepresented individual. How did you get started in breaking down the walls?
That's an interesting question. I didn't actually break anything. I just zoomed into stuff. So I have always been aware that I'm underrepresented. And if you speak to anybody that looks like me, they'll tell you that they've always been aware they're underrepresented. And so you're told at a very early age to try as much harder and, you know, that kind of stuff. But as I grew up, like I said, I saw some role models. So Karen Forrester, I started in hospitality. So Karen Forrester was a real strong tool for me to look up to. And as I grew, I picked up other mentors and looked up to other mentors. But I've actually just zoomed my way and really just forced my way into stuff. And I think that's the way that we probably sometimes need to approach things. We've got to approach being underrepresented as not an issue, but actually a part of the solution. And sometimes we probably just need to take the blinkers off and enter ideas and enter situations without thinking about the underrepresentation. And it goes back to what I said about organizations have got to bear the brunt of it. They're the ones that have got to put the barriers down, not the underrepresented candidates. So in answer to your question, there was I knew that I was going to be underrepresented and had to work extra hard and all that kind of stuff like everybody else does. But there's also the bit around looking after role models and actually just pushing my way through things.
Thank you, Brandie, so much. I think also when we look at confidence, I imagine that's something for all of us that is fundamental. You know, that I think the word Zoom there is interesting. You know, that where does that come from? Where does that fire, if you like, or passion come from, do you think? And I think this is something for Lola as well. That what do you feel that's made up of? What are the foundations of it?
Lola, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think for me, I'm not a very confident individual myself, but I feed off other people's energy. Brandie gives me so much life. She's so strong and so inspirational, and I love looking at people like that and seeing how can I get to that space? How can I be influenced by those people? So it's looking around you as well, and then also, for example, in workplaces, looking at how you can include everybody. And I think, like Brandie said, that's not really up to the individual, that's up to the company. So even in meetings and stuff like that, how can you make people feel confident when they are maybe afraid to share their ideas because it's attached to their status? So it's kind of finding out how you can create a meritocracy of ideas instead of attaching them to status. That might be just putting all your ideas in the middle of the table, people taking them out and reading them, and it's not their ideas, so everyone's ideas are equal. And then also Amazon has a really great idea about golden silence. For the first 30 minutes of their meetings, everybody thinks about their ideas before they share them. So you have time to think about your ideas. Not everybody is a dominant person, and I think that can affect people's confidence as well. So it's looking at how you can support people who aren't naturally confident as well as that, I think.
Thank you both so much. I could ask you lots more questions, but I know that we need to wrap up. Thank you both very, very much indeed. Brandie, for all of the passion that you hold, what you've already done for Nimbus as a community. Thank you very, very much indeed. You've added enormous amounts of value. And I think if we don't all walk away from today's episode actually thinking about what we can do and what we can do immediately, and actually stop talking about it and really making significant difference. 5% is not enough as a CEO in a FTSE. We know the numbers and we know what we should be heading towards. And Lola, I think it is phenomenal what you're doing, still at university, and you are already creating the magazine, which I know is going to be launched fairly soon, to have gone through lockdown, looked at, career opportunities and the real change with economic downturns and so on. I think, your passion, your belief is fabulous. And thank you both very, very much indeed. I think a lot of us can learn from both of you. And I'm always so excited about what that next generation or generations bring. I think we're so lucky to be together, and I think we can support one another. So thank you both very, very much indeed for today.